Is gravity a universal law, or is it merely a local habit that a planet can choose to break? We are conditioned to believe that the Earth is a constant, a solid, immobile platform upon which we build our fragile histories. But the geological specimen suspended in the magnetic dampening field before us suggests a terrifying volatility. This jagged, black rock is a fragment of the Suspended Archipelago of Sector 12, a landmass that rejected the core it was born from. Let us break the seal on the containment unit and document what remains. To the naked eye, the specimen appears to be a standard basaltic geode, roughly the size of a human skull. It is dark, pitted, and laced with veins of a lustrous silver ore. However, its behavior in the laboratory environment is immediately anomalous. Note that we have not engaged the gravity nullifiers in the containment tube. The object is floating of its own accord. In fact, if we were to deactivate the magnetic clamps holding it down, it would not fall to the floor, it would rocket upward, smashing through the ceiling and ascending into the stratosphere. It possesses negative mass characteristics, but spectrographic analysis reveals a more grounded, yet equally catastrophic explanation. The sample is composed of 90% hypermagnetite, an iron oxide structure that has been subjected to a planetary electromagnetic event of apocalyptic scale. Reference Plate 1a, the Global Tectonics Model. Standard planetary geology dictates that a planet's core generates a magnetic field, shielding the surface from solar radiation. In the case of the target world, the core did not merely generate a field, it underwent a violent, instantaneous polarity inversion. The north became south, and the south became north, but with a magnitude of force that exceeded the tensile strength of the lithosphere. The crust of the planet, rich in ferrous metals, was suddenly subjected to a magnetic repulsion force greater than the pull of gravity. The ground was literally repelled by the planet's center. Imagine the sound of that moment. The Great Severing. We are not talking about earthquakes. We are talking about the crust of the planet tearing itself free from the mantle. Entire continents shattered. Mountains were uprooted. And amidst this geological carnage, massive shards of the crust, islands the size of nations, were launched into the sky, caught in a permanent magnetic equilibrium between the repulsion of the core below and the gravity of the void above. The archipelago is not flying, it is being held in a magnetic vice. Visual inspection of the sample's fracture lines confirms this violence. The bottom edge of the rock is not eroded by wind or water, it is sheared. It displays the chaotic, crystalline rupture of stone that has been ripped apart at supersonic speeds. The veins of silver we observed earlier are actually liquefied nickel that froze when the rock was ejected into the upper atmosphere, sealing the trauma of the separation. I find the geography of this floating world deeply disorienting. Reference the holographic map of the high drift. We see chains of islands drifting at altitudes ranging from 10,000 to 30,000 feet. They cast perpetual, moving shadows on the mantle below, a mantle that is now a churning ocean of exposed magma and superheated gas. The ground, as we know it, is gone. There is only the hell below and the vacuum above. The stability of these islands is an illusion. They are locked in a delicate dance of magnetic flux. A minor fluctuation in the planet's core activity causes the islands to bob and weave like corks in a storm. The people who lived here did not inhabit a landscape, they inhabited a frequency. They built their homes on a platform that was constantly trying to escape the planet, held back only by the invisible tether of physics. As we prepare to examine the anthropological evidence in the next phase, we must acknowledge the sheer audacity of survival in such an environment. To live here is to trust that the magnet beneath your feet will not suddenly fail. It is to live with the constant, vertigo-inducing knowledge that down is not a safe place to land, but an open mouth of fire. And up is not a sky, but an endless, airless suffocation. Moving beyond the lithography of the floating crust, we encounter the defining struggle of the archipelago's inhabitants, the war against altitude. In a standard terrestrial environment, the architect's enemy is gravity. Structures must be designed to resist collapsing downward. Here, the vector of threat is inverted. The enemy is the sky. The magnetic repulsion of the core is constant and overpowering, pushing the islands relentlessly upward toward the thinning atmosphere. The civilization survived only by anchoring itself to the abyss. Reference the schematic of the capital spire on island chain Alpha. At first glance, it resembles a suspension bridge, but the physics are reversed. The buildings are not resting on the ground, they're clamped in. We see massive, high-tensile cables, forged from a vanadium-steel alloy, wrapped around the bedrock of the island, pinning the structures in place. But the most striking features are the great tethers. Hanging from the underside of the island, descending thousands of meters into the toxic cloud layer below, are colossal chains. These are not for transportation. They are ballasts. At the end of each chain hangs a massive counterweight, likely a hollowed-out asteroid or a chunk of dense lead, dangling precariously over the exposed mantle. These weights serve a singular, desperate function: to drag the island down. They are the only thing keeping the city within the breathable zone of the atmosphere. This geological reality birthed a society of tension. The cultural artifacts recovered from the site reveal a civilization obsessed with weight. To be heavy was to be safe. To be light was a death sentence. We found coinage that was not valued by the intricacy of its minting, but by its density. A coin made of depleted uranium was worth a fortune. Not because uranium was rare, but because it was heavy. We found garments woven with lead lining. The fashion of the elite involved wearing heavily weighted boots and cloaks lined with iron ingots. It was a display of status. I am so wealthy. I am firmly rooted to this rock. The poor, conversely, were the drifters, without the resources to weigh themselves down. They lived in constant fear of the ascension. A slip, a stumble, or a failure of a safety tether meant falling up. I find the theological implications of this existence profoundly disturbing. The anchor cult dominated their spiritual life. We found temples built around the winch houses of the great tethers. The priests were engineers, responsible for maintaining the integrity of the chains that kept the world from floating into the vacuum. Their deity was not a sky god. The sky was hell, a cold, airless void that swallowed the careless. Their god was the deep. They prayed to the gravity they had lost. Religious iconography depicts saints holding massive stones, their faces contorted in the effort of staying down. Rituals involved the weighing, where infants were strapped into heavy iron cradles immediately after birth to prevent them from drifting away. It creates a psychological profile of a people permanently hunched, gripping the earth, terrified of letting go. Functionally, the city operated as a giant, interconnected web. Because the islands drifted relative to one another, they were linked by a chaotic network of zip lines and flexible bridges. Travel was a harrowing act of acrobatics. To visit a neighbor was to hook oneself onto a cable and slide across a 1,000-foot drop that opened not onto the ground, but onto the churning magma ocean miles below. Yet, despite the peril, they thrived. We see evidence of wind harvesters, massive turbines utilizing the constant updrafts from the mantle to generate power. They farmed fungus on the underside of the islands. In the shadow, utilizing the moisture from the cloud layer, they adapted. But the tension was not just physical, it was social. The great tethers required constant maintenance. The friction of the chains against the rock, the corrosion from the acidic clouds below, it demanded an endless supply of metal and labor. We found records of the cut, a judicial punishment where criminals were not executed, but simply severed. Their personal tethers were cut. They didn't die immediately. They simply floated away, screaming, ascending higher and higher until the air grew too thin to support consciousness, eventually freezing in the upper ionosphere. It is a chilling inversion of our own fears. We fear the dark depths. They feared the light. They feared the open blue. Every window in their city was barred, not to keep burglars out, but to keep the inhabitants in. The metallurgy of the chains themselves deserves specific note. They are pitted and scarred, showing signs of metal fatigue on a massive scale. The constant, groaning pull of the islands against the weights stretched the steel to its molecular limit. The entire city would have sung with a low, mournful vibration, the sound of metal screaming under stress. It was a song of survival, but it was also a countdown. Tension, by its very nature, cannot be sustained forever. The end of the Suspended Archipelago did not come with fire, nor with the rumble of conquest. It came with silence. It came when the math of their survival was overturned by a single catastrophic variable. We call it the repulsion spike. For centuries, the magnetic output of the planet's core had been stable, a constant force pushing against the weight of the islands. But planetary cores are not static engines, they are fluid, turbulent dynamos. On the day of the collapse, the core underwent a geomagnetic jerk, a sudden, sharp increase in field intensity. The repulsive force beneath the islands doubled in the span of 3 minutes. The great tethers, already stressed to their breaking points by generations of fatigue, never stood a chance. The audio logs recovered from the black box of a weather station on Island Beta record the sound of the collapse. It is a deafening series of sonic booms, the sound of the vanadium-steel chains snapping. One by one, with their anchors severed, the islands were no longer held in check. They were released. The entire archipelago was launched upward. It was a mass ejection event. The islands accelerated from their habitable altitude of 15,000 feet to suborbital heights in less than 10 minutes. The civilization experienced a reverse rapture. They did not ascend to heaven. They ascended into the killing zone of the stratosphere. The physiological effects of this rapid ascent were instantaneous and brutal. As the atmospheric pressure plummeted, the air became too thin to sustain consciousness. We found the inhabitants in the same positions they held when the chains broke. There was no panic, because there was no oxygen to fuel it. They simply sat down, gasped for air that wasn't there, and drifted into a hypoxic coma. The chilling preservation of the site is due to the altitude. The islands settled into a stable drift in the upper ionosphere, where the temperature hovers near absolute zero. The moisture in the air flash froze. We found families gathered around dinner tables, perfectly preserved in rime ice. Their meals untouched. Their lungs ruptured by the sudden pressure differential. They look peaceful, but they are statues of asphyxiation. The cities themselves remain intact. The buildings, built to withstand the wind, easily survived the ascent. The wind turbines are still spinning in the thin, high-altitude jet streams, but there is no one left to use the power. The suspended archipelago is now a ghost fleet of frozen stone, orbiting the planet like a ring of debris, a silent monument to the fragility of the Goldilocks zone of habitable pressure.